Okay, well, I think we're good to go. Welcome to the ANS Global webinar, the future of building with biodiversity net gain. We're good to have with us today Ashley Welch from AECOM and Bob Edmonds from UKHab and Simon Hargreaves from AECOM. We're going to be having this discussion together on what is BNG and how does it work, potential challenges and how to meet them, and how to make sure the systems are a long-term asset, the vision and outcome of implementing BNG, and useful resource. I think just quickly before we start, Simon and Ash and Bob, if you could just give a very brief overview of yourselves, and then we can get into the webinar.
Yeah, thanks, Steve. So my name's Ash Welch. I'm a green infrastructure and biodiversity specialist at AECOM. So predominantly my work is ecology based, but I do work very closely with landscape architects, engineers, different practitioners to essentially develop a holistic approach to kind of development design. And within that, we do a lot of biodiversity net gain work and a lot of kind of habitat creation and enhancement work.
Thank you, Ash, that's great. And Simon, perhaps you could just do a brief introduction.
Yep, sure. Hi, everyone. So my name's Simon Hargreaves. I'm a urban designer and landscape architect at AECOM as well. I'm based in Devon, and that's kind of important because Cornwall very early on adopted mandatory BNG. So in terms of my kind of experience, that's been accelerated by being in the Plymouth office. So we've been working on schemes for a couple of years now, either side of the Tamar, and yeah, we continue to learn and sort of adapt our processes, working with Ash and other colleagues across AECOM to deliver BNG. So yeah, we're getting really good experience and a breadth of knowledge in this field.
Thank you, Simon. That's very enthusing. We look forward to hearing more about this as we go through on this webinar. Bob, you can perhaps just give us a brief rate yourselves.
Sure, thanks very much. And yeah, apologies for the slight technical hitch there and that I don't have my video working this morning, but really nice to be invited to this webinar. So my name's Bob Edmonds. I'm a director of UKHab Limited, which is the organisation that looks after the UK habitat classification. And I'm also a technical director at SLR Consulting. So a consultant by background and training for sort of 20 odd years, but spent a lot of the last 10 or more years thinking a lot and working hard on biodiversity net gain. I'm also a member of SIEM's Professional Standards Committee and have represented SIEM on a number of courses, events and what have you in relation to biodiversity net gain. So yeah, really grateful for you inviting me onto this and look forward to a good and stimulating debate.
Thank you, Bob. That's really, really good. I think while you're on there, we might as well kick straight into this because really we want to understand more about BNG and also realise the importance of BNG, that BNG shouldn't be onerous. It's a solution to better spaces, better places in the future. So perhaps, Bob, you could just give a bit of an overview what BNG is and how does it actually work, do you think?
Sure. Okay, great. Thanks very much. So biodiversity net gain is a concept that's been around in the UK for probably the best part of, or slightly more than 10 years. Before that, there was a very similar, conceptually very similar to something called biodiversity offsetting. Effectively, what we're trying to do with biodiversity net gain is to deliver development projects that leave nature, biodiversity, in a better state than it was before the project started. And there are certain principles around biodiversity net gain, which have been well established through programs such as the Business and Biodiversity Offsets Programme back at the turn of the millennium. But we now have our own BNG principles that were published in 2016. So these are now well established. And more recently, and there's also some guidance that came out in 2018, which help practitioners to develop biodiversity net gain projects. Of course, what's happened in the last few years is that biodiversity net gain has become well established through things like the NPPF in England, and then more recently, and in other policies across other nations of the UK. More recently, England has taken a step further, and now England is in the process of pushing through a fairly substantial package of environmental measures through the Environment Bill, and that includes the delivery of mandatory biodiversity net gain in 2023. So those of us that are working in biodiversity at the moment see this as quite obviously going to lead to a step change in the way that we think about biodiversity within development. And I'm sure the others on the call here, Ash and Simon, will agree that we're already seeing those changes coming through in both rural development projects and, where I think we're going to be talking most of the time today, in more urban projects. So one area where UKHab has been involved in this is to develop a green infrastructure typology, which sits alongside our main UK habitat classification, but is really helpful in kind of really honing down different types of urban habitats, and particularly the types of new urban habitats that can be created to deliver biodiversity net gain. And one of the things that I'm really pleased to hear about is the work that Ash has done and yourselves have done with developing this guidance that you've launched recently, which introduces ways to bring in biodiversity into the urban environment through things like green roofs and what have you. So those are the challenges that we've got: delivering net gain on sites where there might not be a lot of biodiversity to start with. And I think we're trying to address those challenges through this recent guidance.
That's very good, Bob. Yeah, exactly what we want to do is we recognise there's challenges, but along with those challenges, there's opportunities, and I think that's why the environmental bill and other drivers of BNG is being processed, because we want to capitalise on those opportunities. Would you go with that, Ash? What would you say?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, so when we're talking about urban areas in particular, I guess the biggest difficulty, the biggest challenge we're going to encounter or are encountering is a lack of space. So you might have sites where I've encountered it very recently. There's a number of sites which may look like waste ground, but actually some of the habitats there are pretty good for invertebrates and diverse plant species. So whilst they're not appreciated by the average person, from an ecological point of view, they are really rich in life. So when you take that into consideration in biodiversity net gain, essentially what you're doing is you're taking a snapshot of the baseline and you're converting it into a measurable sort of substance. So you're turning it into numbers and then comparing that with, say, like a landscape plan that someone like Simon would produce. And then through that process, you then work out the change in biodiversity units, and that tells you whether or not you're going to achieve biodiversity net gain. And typically, the Environment Bill will mandate that you need to achieve 10% net gain, but different local boroughs and different local authorities might decide to do things slightly differently. So that's always worth bearing in mind. However, we go back to that point about a lack of space. If you've got some of these habitats and on your site currently, and you're going to develop on it, what tends to happen is you haven't got much space, so you need to develop on the whole plot. So you immediately lose loads and loads of biodiversity units, and then suddenly you don't have much space to put back habitats. So suddenly you're in this kind of deficit that's really hard to overcome, and that's why it's really important then to think outside the box and how you can use some of these more kind of nuanced kind of creative habitats like urban green infrastructure, so living walls, sustainable drainage features, how you can start to use them within your development to start to help you achieve that target.
That's really, really good, because we know, and we've heard it from the industry, that there are challenges. There are challenges for architects, ecologists, landscape architects to actually look at a site, meet their client's expectation in return of investment, and meet the BNG. So it's a potential challenge really for architects and consultants that actually we've got to design, we've got to meet the BNG and meet their expectations. So, but there is opportunities, as you've rightly just pointed out, Ash, which I think, Simon, from your experience, you could help on some of these challenges and how we can develop landscape to meet the BNG.
Yeah, so I mean, as everyone is well aware, biodiversity and its functions are essential to sustain our society and the environment and also the economy. But as landscape architects, we're kind of, we're very aware of the termed ecosystem services that green infrastructure provides. But one of the difficulties in sort of communicating the benefits, if you like, of GI and expressing them at design meetings when you're in these meetings with other professionals, it's quite difficult to capture the kind of, as I said, the benefits of the green infrastructure ecosystem services, because they're not as predictable as nuts and bolts. And that's because it's a living thing and it's more complex, and it kind of contributes to many different aspects. And getting those metrics, getting the values out of that, as I said, it's very difficult, and it just means that with metrics, Biodiversity Net Gain, for example, we're going to be able to essentially obtain that data and have it so it's ready on hand to kind of use in these design meetings to really promote the benefits. So yeah, there's lots of opportunities that come with this shift. But yeah, that is in particular one, that it's going to help us to kind of articulate what is scheme success, what does it look like, and what are the numbers to back that up.
That's good. What would you say, Ashen, as to what's required to actually get those numbers? Because it's important that we do achieve them.
Yeah, so if we focus in on the urban green infrastructure habitats, it largely all comes down to design. And there's no reason why the design of these features can't benefit other aspects of a design as well, like Simon's just said. So I always try to approach it from a sustainability perspective alongside an ecological perspective. So the first thing I always do when I'm designing a living roof, a living wall, or a sustainable drainage feature, any sort of urban green infrastructure, is that you want to identify what the primary purpose of that feature is going to be. So it depends on your development. So if you might have a development where air pollution might be a serious issue, or the urban heat island effect is a serious issue, and maybe that is more important than the ecology on site. And you might have other sites where ecology is the predominant factor that you need to focus on. So I always say that's the best thing to identify. When you're creating these features, there's always going to be kind of like subsidiary benefits to it. So even if you are focusing on sustainability aspects, there are going to be ecological benefits. They just might not be as profound. So it really depends on what the focus is. Once you've bottomed that out, let's say it is your primary focus is ecology, and you are doing your utmost to achieve net gain on the site. You need to really think about a number of things. So soil is really key. So getting the soil right is really key. I mean, the soil is a fundamental part of how habitats form. So that's really key. So if you're designing a living roof, for example, and you want to make it really good for biodiversity, you're probably going to opt for a more kind of like grassland style living roof. And with that, what you want to ensure is that the soil is appropriate for the type of habitat that you want to create, and also that it's not filled with loads of nutrients, because you want to create a diverse habitat, and typically diverse grasslands are typically nutrient poor. So that's one aspect that you might want to think about. You then need to think about your planting selection. So what plants are you going to grow on that particular habitat to ensure that it gets a high biodiversity value? So again, depends on the location. So it might be sitting right at the top of a skyscraper in the middle of the sun all day, every day. And so you need to think not just about what's great for biodiversity, but how you're going to ensure longevity of that particular habitat as well. So if it's going to be in the sun all day, you're going to need to ensure that your planting scheme, your planting palette is appropriate for those abiotic conditions, those environmental conditions. So plants that love sunlight, for example. If you're building a biosolar roof, you then might want to think a little bit differently. So you've got aspects of shading, you've got aspects of differences in moisture across the roof. So you kind of need to take all of these things into account when you're designing. But that's fundamentally the most important thing, because there are many examples of living roofs, living walls, green infrastructure more generally, which kind of, fails quite soon after it's kind of installed, primarily because it's not been designed correctly.
That's very, very important what you highlight there, because the whole purpose of the BNG is to future protect our environments. So we need to be sure that when we're designing green infrastructure, whether it's sustainable drainage schemes, whether it's living walls, whether it's green roofs, whatever we're applying has to be scrutinized and designed correctly from the beginning to ensure longevity. So we need to be sure, as you say, as to substrates. The substrate has to relate to the plant palette. The plant palette has to relate to the climate that it's into, and the plant palette also has to relate to a water management and then a maintenance regime. Have you got anything to add to that, Bob, before we move on?
Well, yeah, so actually more of a question, if anything. So I think one of the things that's really important with Biodiversity Net Gain, as you've just mentioned, is making sure that you're designing for the long term. So Natural England's and the Biodiversity Net Gain principles would say that these features need to be in place for a minimum of 30 years and ideally in perpetuity. Now that's quite, habitat creation, as Ash has just said to us, in these types of environments on top of tall buildings and what have you, represents its own challenges anyway. And so in ensuring that longevity is a further challenge. And what I'm interested in is how you would actually go about things like monitoring for these habitats when they're newly created, so that you can be certain that they are achieving the benefits that you've set out for them.
That's very, very important. So I think, as you say, to monitor, so it comes back to having a strategy right at the beginning of the scheme. Your design strategy, the species we're doing, the habitat hotels, habitat provision that we're building in, the natural organic substrate. I mean, soil itself being an ecosystem, soil is more than just a substrate for plants to grow in. Soil's providing for solitary bees, for the insects, for the ecology. So we need to establish at the design stage what we're going to be returning on that matrix. And then, as you say, under maintenance, we should have a policy going forward that is monitored, so we can start to see what the population is of improvements and what needs to be added, because it's going to be an ongoing program. If we're committing to BNG, if we're committing to green infrastructure, we must commit to a maintenance program. And this is something that often comes up is, I fully understand I need to do green infrastructure. I fully understand I need rainwater harvesting. I fully understand we want to give back to the environment. We want to extract the carbon. Everybody's on the same page, but then the question comes up as to maintenance. And what's it going to cost to maintain the building going forward, having green infrastructure? What we need to look at is that it's a new mindset, because 20 years ago, we had soft landscaping in our urban spaces. Now we don't have soft landscaping, and we have the BNG that we need to work with and see it as an opportunity, as we said earlier. So we need to build the maintenance strategy so we can monitor what improvements we're making and what improvements we need to make. We may need to add more pollinators. We may need to add different species, etc., as time goes on. But it has to be built into a maintenance cost that comes under the service charge and management costs of the building, which is a challenge, and it is a challenge that comes up. And we might meet some resistance, which we need to then be sure of the environmental data and of what we can achieve. Do you think that's correct, Ash?
Yeah, I do. It's really important. I think, God, yeah. So I guess this is a wide, I mean, Bob's question is a really good one. It's probably like I said, a wider question for all of that concerns all the biodiversity net gain and all habitat creation and enhancement. Is at the minute, like with the environment bill, there's nothing that is kind of suggesting how it's going to be monitored and managed, or monitored over a certain period of time. At the minute, with biodiversity net gain, for most habitats, there are condition criteria, and I guess the suggestion is that over the 30-year period that you will be mandatory having to manage those habitats. you would have to monitor the condition to ensure that the habitat condition, which is a component of biodiversity net gain, essentially tells you the kind of relative value of that habitat. So if you've got a grassland, you might have two grasslands. One is going to be slightly better, maybe slightly richer in biodiversity than the other. So the one slightly richer in biodiversity would be assigned higher condition. You are plugging that data into the metric, the biodiversity metric. And when you do that, you're essentially saying that you're going to achieve this number of biodiversity units. So your grassland is going to be this good. And the only way to really ensure that is over that management period is to essentially monitor its progress and its development to that point. And if it doesn't get to that point, then what happens? You need to kind of rework your management and maintenance. And the same thing applies to living roofs and living walls. It's a wider question how that's going to be done. The condition criteria are there to kind of like help people be able to monitor it, I guess. They're probably not as robust as what a lot of ecologists and botanists would like. Obviously, I think a lot of people would like more extensive ecological surveys done to really reflect the botanical nature and maybe the entomology, like the insect and invertebrate communities of those plots. But what we have done, and I know we're going to talk about our guidance notes in a bit, is in the biodiversity metric 2.0 and the 3.0 that's just come out. If you look through the technical supplement, there are condition criteria given to all the broad habitat types. When it comes to urban green infrastructure, the criteria provided is really generic. It's either absent or really generic. So in metric 2, it's all focused on one particular habitat type, and you can't use that for living roofs, living walls, and so on. In metric 3, they have broadened it out, and you can loosely kind of use it now. However, it's still not that great, and I would say it's, you're going to want to build upon that if you are going to monitor these habitats. You're going to want to do something more robust, and I think our guidance note starts to build upon that. It gives you it gives you a little bit more information and a little bit more to go by. So it kind of tells you what you should expect. A good condition, living roof, brown roof, green roof, whatever it might be, living wall, sustainable drainage feature, what it looks like and how it should be designed. And I think by using that information, you can start to build your own ecological surveys and monitor them appropriately to ensure that they actually reach that target condition that you set out. So I think it's really important. How that's going to work in practice, we don't know yet, but I think it's really important that, like you said, Steve, we build the maintenance costs into the span of the building costs, maintenance costs for the building, and maybe that's where the monitoring comes from as well. We don't know yet. This is all really new to everyone, and hopefully over the next couple of years it will all become a bit more apparent and people get to grips with how it works. But that is arguably the most important thing. Yeah.
Might be worth just mentioning here, just a plug for, so SIEM has just published some templates for biodiversity net gain reports, and that includes a report for a management and monitoring plan. So it doesn't tell you how to do it, but at least it will give you a structure. So that might help folk. I mean, I think you're absolutely right. There's a sort of guidance gap at the moment for how we're going to deliver these things. The new guidance that has been produced here really is a really welcome step in the right direction, but I think there's space for some more, isn't there, particularly in that area that we've just been talking about. I know that Natural England are looking at the moment at what they want to see in their habitat management plans for biodiversity net gain. So there will be a sort of statutory requirement to provide a management plan for BNG habitats that you're providing. And that's going to come through. So the Environment Bill will obviously go through in the next few months, we're expecting. Nobody really knows what that parliamentary timetable is going to be, but there's a whole raft of secondary legislation that DEFRA and Natural England are working on at the moment. And I think that part, the habitat management and monitoring plan, will form a really important part of it for those of us, practitioners working in this field.
That's very helpful, Bob. I appreciate you bringing that in because, as you say, we've got to have this strategy. We've got to have this management plan, and I think as architects and as consultants, we need to be working with our clients to create awareness and to let them know that this is something that needs to be built into the ongoing. Simon, you can add to that, I'm sure.
Yeah, so I mean, just to bring it back a little bit, in terms of the sort of opportunities again with BNG and as it's been discussed, obviously in urban environments we may struggle with space, and then there's the whole sort of multifunctionality of different sort of landscape interventions and what they can offer in terms of SUDS or carbon sequestration or whatever it is. But it's just to really flag as well the kind of designer's responsibility in all of this. I wouldn't say that we're pioneers at the moment. Obviously, these kind of interventions have been going on for quite a long time. I certainly wouldn't claim to be a pioneer, but I do believe that we are at a very early stage where we're starting to see these alternative details and mechanisms, landscape elements, however you want to describe them, as has been described, SUDS features or green walls or green roofs or whatever it is, this kind of innovation. We just need to be aware of the kind of responsibility that we have with all of this stuff, in that we are kind of pioneering this at the moment, and it is being rolled out to the masses, to the high streets, etc. And we're starting to see it pop up everywhere. Now, there's great benefit to that, and that's amazing. But I just recently seen on LinkedIn this week, there was a SUD scheme highlighted by somebody, and it was an example of something that had been done badly, essentially. So as designers, we have this great responsibility to deliver these details, and they have to be delivered well, because once again, focusing on that kind of meeting, the design table meeting, bad PR of these kind of interventions could have a potential real bad impact for when we're trying to justify the cost. We're trying to justify it based on the data that we're collecting through studies like BNG, etc. We really want to make sure that these are detailed correctly, and they're designed to last, and they function to achieve what it is that we're trying to achieve. So that's the first thing, and then I couldn't agree more. All the words on management and maintenance, etc. Obviously, this is a must. We have to sign up to this. If these elements are gonna hit the target conditions that we're setting out in the assessments, we have to maintain them.
That's really, really helpful, and I think that is a clear guide to how we, as coming from yourself, Simon, as a landscape architect. It's so important right from the initial concept of the scheme that we look at the longevity and we look at the future, the long-term result. It's not, to use a homely expression, a box ticking exercise. I'm going to put some GI in just to get planning, or I'm going to put some GI in just to meet this condition. It's actually got to be designed properly and analysed and measured and maintained, so to make sure that what we're proposing is suitable. It may not be that at some points a living wall may not be the answer, or a green roof may be the answer, or otherwise a living wall may be the answer, or a bioswale. We've got to look at every opportunity on every scheme to make sure we capitalise on the environmental opportunities. And that takes skill, and it takes consultancy, and it takes time at the beginning of a project to actually analyse these opportunities, which are challenges. So, some projects will lend themselves to all three, living walls, green roofs, bioswales, whatever. Other projects will have one of, or some of them. So it's really how we meet these challenges when we start designing, and I think a clear and a more collaborative working with the architects, the ecologists, with specialists in the industry will help us to deliver the right solution for each particular project. Do you think that's right, Ash?
Yeah, definitely. One of the one of the big buzzwords at the moment is net zero, right? And I think if you approach design in a holistic manner, so if you are part of the design team, if you sit down with your colleagues or external personnel who are working on the project, whether you're an engineer, an architect, landscape architects, an environmentalist, an ecologist, whatever you might be, maybe even drainage specialist, sit down. Like, everyone's going to have things that they need to include within the design, and green infrastructure provides the kind of almost perfect solution to hit almost most of those things, most of the those different personnel's kind of requirements. Think of it as a kind of sustainable, holistic sort of solution to many things, and it starts to become a lot easier to kind of get green infrastructure into your design and ensure that it's going to be there for a long time and be successful as a feature. So there's no reason why there should be any conflict between different disciplines. And actually, I think what we need to do is to move closer to a more kind of collaborative style of working. I know a lot of people are starting to do that already, and we're starting to see some amazing designs. But I think what the great thing about Biodiversity Net Gain, I know a lot of people have concerns about kind of reducing biodiversity, which is an amazing thing, down to like a set of numbers. And I do appreciate those concerns. But the power it gives is that it allows people that aren't ecologists to understand biodiversity in a way that they may have not understood it previously. And it is kind of, you are building upon that kind of box ticking exercise. It is a lot more nuanced than that. It's not as simple as we've done this and we tick a box. And I think like the powerful thing with this is the more that you work closely with these different disciplines, and then the closer you work together, the greater appreciation you have of ecology and how it underpins a lot of sustainability. And over time, people will become kind of, ecological experts in their own right, and a lot of this stuff will become second nature, I think.
That's good. Bob or Simon, do you want to add anything to that?
Yeah, Steve, I'll chip in there. A couple of words that have been thrown around for the past couple of years has been landscape analytics. I really feel that we see it everywhere. We live in a data-consuming, data-driven kind of world at the moment, and as I said sort of early on, that one of the difficulties of explaining the benefits of GI is that it's one of these things that has been harder to get this data for. So in the future, if we can have more of these landscape analytics available, so we can see the impact, so run it as a case study post development, and we can actually get the data out of there, crossing multiple kind of genres about carbon sequestration and stormwater management and whatever it is, habitat creation, biodiversity, etc., etc. If we can get these numbers and actually have these numbers available, I just I think it would be very, very positive. It's you think of kind of concrete and you think of nuts and bolts, stresses and strains, and you have all this data available. It exists and people can look at it. But as I say, the data relating to GI isn't there. So if we can improve this kind of landscape analytics function and have this data that's there on hand, I think it'd be really, really an important contribution for the future.
That's very, very helpful. Very helpful. Bob, did you want to add anything on data and analytics?
Yeah, so a couple of things come to mind listening to Simon and Ash talking there. So the first thing, of course, Ash and myself have already mentioned Natural England's Biodiversity Net Gain metric 3.0 that was released 2 weeks ago. And obviously that's going to be a key driver for implementing these things. But the other thing, Simon also talked there about ecosystem services and ensuring that we capture some of the other services that are delivered by the types of habitats and features that are being created. And there is another tool that Natural England has released called the Environmental Benefits of Nature tool, which kind of builds on the basics of the habitat metric, but provides some simple metric for other services that might be there. So it talks about groundwater, surface water, flood management, water quality, and what have you. And so I think that's a relatively new tool. It had been tested and had been kicked around, I think, as an early version a few years ago. And I think what's really interesting is now Natural England have put a version out there for the public to play with. It's a beta version. And so I'm really interested in hearing folk, applying that metric alongside the BNG metric, and seeing how that works, and hopefully feeding back the info back to Natural England to make sure that we have good tools to provide the types of data that Simon's just been talking about. We need to develop these tools, but we need to help regulators and others develop those tools so that we're in a better place in a few years' time than we are now.
That's brilliant. So So what we're starting to see here, which is really helpful. So thank you, Simon, Ash, and Bob. But what we're starting to see is that there's tools provided, there's industry services provided. What we need to do is work as a collaboration, work more openly, and actually look at how we can bring everything together. Like you mentioned, rightly so, rainwater and stormwater and rainwater harvesting. And then we start looking at how we can incorporate blue roofs. We look at how we can do rainwater harvesting systems, direct that water through a living wall. We look at bioswales, as we mentioned, suds. So we actually look at the site, look at the concrete jungle and say, how much of the natural resources can we put back, and then start measuring the data. And what you mentioned, one as the post reports, I think it was Simon that mentioned it, was absolutely brilliant. So we can look at a site before it starts, look at a site after completion, and look at a site 5 years down the road. And I think in time we can build a management structure so we can go 10 years down the road and say, look now, what are the environmental gains from this site by using GI and using the natural resource and what we're giving back. But it's going to take this collaboration to make sure that what we implement is suitable for the site and for a long-term sustainable advantage, which comes back to what we were saying right at the beginning, that we do need to design systems that are suitable. I think Ash touched on it as to tall skyscrapers that's going to be exposed in the sun. So we need to analyze that we're putting the right system for that particular location. And design, installation and maintenance are key elements that we need to consider. That is something that's, we would say, is covered in the guide. Would you say, Ash, that you've produced with ourselves?
Yeah, it is. So what we've attempted to do with the guides, so first of all, the guides in themselves, they are, whilst there are two guides. One of the guides is largely focused on biodiversity net gain and how you can design these features to achieve good, healthy biodiversity net gain scores and get them maximize the biodiversity value of these habitats. And the second one then looks at kind of more of the management and maintenance properties of those and all the sorts of kind of technical details that you're going to need to know if you're going to implement one of these features. So in their own right, we split them up deliberately because we felt like they're kind of, whilst they are linked, there is like some, what we want them to be is really concise, easy navigable documents which you can find the bits of information you want to find really quickly. So I've lost my train of thought now. What was the question, Steve?
But it's really to make sure that the systems that are implemented are for the long term. So it's designing correctly, isn't it, from the beginning?
Yeah, I mean, so that's it. So one of the key things that we've ensured that we've done with these documents is that we provide a range of different kind of case studies and examples of design, essentially, of different designs of living roofs, walls and suds. And we appreciate that not every single example of one of these habitats is going to be able to be designed primarily for biodiversity and gain the most biodiversity units. I mean, in a lot of cases, you're going to need to make compromises, like we said. If there is a holistic sort of approach to sustainability, then your living roof or living wall might need to be designed for stormwater drainage, like you just said, Steve. So if that is the case, you're not necessarily going to use the species that are the best for invertebrates in an urban area, for example. So then there needs to be compromises made, and that influences your design. So what we've done in the guidance note is provide sort of breakdown of what these compromises can look like and how they influence the biodiversity net gain score. So in a lot of cases, I mean, one of the examples, for example, that we give is a living wall, and we show what a living wall design for biodiversity looks like. And typically that would be something that is kind of synonymous, that looks a bit like a meadow. But unfortunately, as everyone knows, a meadow come the back end of the summer starts to dry out and it starts to go brown in color, and over winter it starts to die out and doesn't look aesthetically very pleasing. Now, a lot of these kind of living walls, a lot of them are placed around kind of public facing areas, right? So is that what people are going to want to see during the winter? And there's an argument to say no. And if that's the case, then compromises are going to be made, because there's obviously different ecosystem services that you need to hit. And maybe that's, you know, it's a public space, so we want those health and well-being aspects. So do we need to kind of plant a number of different evergreen species in there to give it that sort of like green, aesthetically pleasing look over winter? And so there's different ways you can do it. So you can start to build up a mix of these sort of kind of evergreen species that aren't necessarily great for biodiversity, but also mix it in with stuff that is great for biodiversity in that local area. So we do go into those sorts of nuanced areas. And I would definitely say go and check them out, and you can apply those same principles and concepts to your projects. I've heard from people as well, like I had someone from America contact me and say the design guides are fantastic because the principles can be applied pretty much to any projects in North and Western Europe and North America as well. Obviously the botanical species will differ, but the principles are largely the same. And even in places where biodiversity net gain isn't a thing yet, in countries where it hasn't been adopted, the design principles and the technical information is all really valid. So there's loads of stuff to get your teeth into and use.
That's very good. Have you got any comment to make on the design side of things, Simon?
Sorry, I had you on mute there. So yeah, I mean, it's kind of interesting in terms of, you know, biodiversity net gain and the sort of, again, bringing it back to the kind of potential challenges for, you know, designers to be working with this metric. In terms of healthy starts, you know, it's really important that there's a big cross-discipline awareness, and I always like to think of it, to be honest, as a design tool. I know that the sort of catchphrase box ticking exercise has been used, and I don't really see it like that. I mean, it's a metric, and it's there to analyze the data, but that's as far as it goes. You know, there's no constraints on the design that you can implement. You know, if anything, it's giving, you know, designers, landscape architects, whoever, more opportunity to use innovation. We've spoken before about these constrained sites. You know, you're in a constrained site. We need to use innovation because we need to somehow generate more space for the GI. So, you know, stuff like this I think it's a real big opportunity for us, and you know, we should seize that opportunity and move forward with it. But yeah, there are big changes, you know, in terms of workflows and that, speaking from a landscape architect's perspective, in terms of how the kind of bog standard landscape plans or drawing work that we do now kind of needs to change going forward, as we sort of need to extract these data sets in order to calculate through the metric. You know, we need to adopt different ways of working. That's one thing I would say. So in terms of the processes and managing the data to get the accurate outputs, you know, we need to change slightly how we work. And then also there needs to be an awareness from the planning authorities of the information that they're actually receiving, the quality of the information that they're receiving, and you know, and that's kind of interesting because, as I said, we've been working on projects for quite a while now, and you know, I'm aware of you know, different consultancies working on in slightly different ways, and sometimes, yeah, you know, there's a question mark whether the actual data set is of the same kind of quality. So that's an interesting conversation as well.
That's really helpful. So really what we're looking at here is 21st century architecture. It's new principles, it's a new mindset. You know, we've got opportunities, we've got roofs, we've got walls, we've got perimeters of buildings, we've got systems, we've got soil, we've got rainwater harvesting. We have actually got the tools, and what we need to do is start looking at a completely different angle in view of the systems being implemented for a long-term asset. And as we've really touched on these points, as we've discussed, I'm conscious Asher's got time restraints today, so we've got to keep moving. But we've got to focus on design, we've got to focus on installation, and we've got to focus on maintenance. If we do things in a professional, sustainable way, we will create better spaces, which is really the vision and outcome of the BNG policy, is a better future for our oncoming generation. We're leaving, we've built a concrete jungle. We've got air pollution issues. We've got biodiversity issues. We've underestimated the value of ecology. We've got flooding issues. We've got these environmental challenges, but green infrastructure will help to reduce those issues and create a new future, which I wonder if just for a couple of minutes, whether Bob, Ash and Simon could just really just recap on that, on as to how the BNG is going to help and how we can just, any other points they want to flag up before we just round up.
Thanks, Steve. So I'll just kick off there, because I think you and Simon have just raised a couple of points that I thought was worth reflecting on, and that's around this the idea that actually we need to make sure that our professionals have got all the right skills to do both the design work that you've been talking about, but also to evaluate those schemes that come through. And I must admit, so I'd really like to see, some more training and more information sharing between ecologists and between landscape architects and all those other disciplines that need to be involved. Because I think, as Simon's said already, we want to, this is, we're sort of breaking new ground, and there's definitely space to innovate in the urban environment for sure. But also we need to test those designs out, see which ones work well. So maybe we need a resource hub. You've already got your design guides that you've produced, which are fantastic, but it's like, is there space for case studies and more examples so folk can see what other practitioners are doing? I think that would be really helpful. So yeah, that's something that I'd certainly like to see.
That's brilliant. Simon and Ash, do you want to add into that, come into that?
Yeah, I agree with Bob completely there. This might surprise people that aren't ecologists, but there is, like, within ecology itself over the last 20 years or so, the focus of our work has always been protected species predominantly, and there has been some habitat work and some botanical work, but predominantly ecologists are trained to survey and be experts in dormice and great-crested newts and bats and all of these sorts of species that we have legislation for in this country. And there has been, in my opinion, there's been like a kind of a, not disregard, but kind of, habitats and botany has been forgotten about a little bit, when, in reality, it's the thing that underpins most of ecology and biodiversity. So I actually see what's going to happen is Biodiversity Net Gain and the amazing work that Bob's done with UKHab is that I think over the next couple of years, we're going to see this real shift and rebalancing of the skill set of ecologists. And we're going to get a cohort of ecologists that come through that hopefully are really well botanically trained, really thinking holistically and thinking more about sustainability and not just about biodiversity. And I think that will really help when working with other consultants and practitioners. I think that will really help with that sort of collaborative working. And we're starting to see it already, which is really good. But yeah, that's going to need a lot of training, and that's going to need more resourcing. I think the ideas around building new case studies and building upon that every time we get new case studies is a really good one to continue to help the community.
Thank you. Simon, did you want to add anything on the BNG?
It, just as been, as we've discussed, really, I totally agree with what you were just saying then, Bob, and the more we can get this innovation out there, we can deliver successful schemes, we can document them, and that information can be shared. I think that's would be something that would be very helpful. Design guides like what ANS had provided, really good for people starting out at sort of all different levels on their kind of BNG journey. Looking at the kind of innovation, the market, what is available. Yeah, it's all good stuff. But yeah, design guides going forward, biodiversity design guides, designing with biodiversity, as the kind of experience for everyone evolves and we're slightly further down the line on this, we can begin to get that information together and get the information out there. So yeah, it's really positive. And BNG is a design driver for big schemes, big infrastructure schemes, housing estates. It's obviously really positive that we create these more rich biodiverse landscapes and get as much GI as we can into this development. So yeah, just one of positivity really for the future.
Thank you for that, Simon. So I think this has been really enthusing. We've got the BNG guide, which we'll be sharing, which Ash and self at AECOM and the team have put together. Really, it's a nature-based solution. We're looking at nature. Nature was here in the beginning, and we must not leave nature out of our developments. It's key to our future. As we've touched on today, we might get resistance from clients. Let's give them the positives of the environmental benefits. The investors, 25 years ago, they paid for soft landscaping. There's no reason now why we can't build in green infrastructure on the walls, on the roofs, on the perimeters of buildings. We must meet the resistance with positives. We must come up with design solutions, maintenance strategies, and measurable data that we can share and pass on as we go forward, which is really what the BNG guide, it can help with the process. Conscious we've gone a bit over time, but we would be very glad to have some questions. I'm happy to, if anyone wants to put any questions onto the Q&A chat. We've got a couple of minutes where we can just take some questions before Ash and Simon and Bob, which we very much appreciate them giving up their time today to move on to their greener and better spaces that they'll be creating.
Whilst we wait for some questions, Steve, can I just make a quick point about the guidance notes?
Yes, definitely.
Yeah, so I know we spoke about them already, and we've given a flavour about the two different guidance notes, good practice guidance notes, and what they're about. I'd just like to say as well, like, if you are going to use them, don't worry about them conflicting with official Natural England or DEFRA guidance. They have both been signed off by Natural England and DEFRA, and we've also had BRE as a partner with the guidance notes as well, which is really good. So they actually adhere to all of the BREEAM principles. So if you're working on a BREEAM project, what you're going to be designing is going to also adhere to the principles of BREEAM, which is really great. And yeah, they're there to be used and there to be shared, and we would really love some feedback on them. So whilst the Biodiversity Net, there's two documents like I mentioned earlier, whilst the Biodiversity Net Gain document focuses predominantly at the moment on metric 2.0, because that's the most recent metric that we've all been able to use and get to grips with. Metric 3 has just been released, and there are some changes in metric 3 which we will need to reflect in an updated version of our Biodiversity Net Gain metric guidance note. So there are.
Oh, sorry. Can anybody hear me still? Can you hear me, Ash?
Yep, you're still there, Steve. Hi there.
Sorry, it just dropped out for a minute, but we've got it all back. Yeah, so thank you for what you were saying there, Ash, onto the having the BNG guide. Very, very helpful, and we will be sharing it, and it will be updated. We're on a journey together with AECOM and UKHab. And as we were saying during the conversation, it's a collaboration that we're working together to create this better future. I'm just checking, see if any other questions have come in. I can't see any questions coming in at the moment, but we just have another quick look now. Nobody else has actually got any questions on. Have you got any other questions, anybody?
I can see one from Daniela Rizzi. Should we talk about that one?
Yeah, fine.
So Daniela's asked, I was just wondering if you were also using the term nature-based solutions, considering potential synergies with ongoing EU-funded nature-based solution projects. Approximately 300 million euros invested for research and innovation projects, and more than 100 cities involved. I'm happy to talk about that one unless someone else wants to.
Yeah, no, you pick up on that, Ash. It's good.
Yeah, so Daniela and everyone, just for your knowledge, the reason we have titled these urban green infrastructure is largely because they are the terms that are used in Natural England's biodiversity metric, and also in UK habitat classification, which Bob has worked on. So what we're trying to do is to essentially keep to the same terminology But in essence, they are nature-based solutions, and they can be designed as nature-based solutions. So I would totally agree that there is a synergy there, there is a link up there, and the principles can definitely be used to design nature-based solutions and link up with the kind of EU-funded MBS projects that you speak about.
Can't see any more questions coming. Have you got any more coming through your way, Ash?
There was a question about when the guides would be shared. I think Kezia...
Yeah, and Kezia's answered that one. I think she put that onto the screen, but we will share the guides, certainly.
So there's another question that's come through from Madeline, which says, who do you expect to meet with most resistance when delivering Biodiversity Net Gain?
Very good question. Yeah, it's just come through to me there as well now. That's good. Who wants to pick that one up? Simon? It's a good question.
Well, I mean, yeah, you know, we see resistance on all different levels. Was it Madeline?
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, it's a very interesting question. I can't give any names, but yeah, I mean, you see it on all different levels, and it depends on the client really, and you know, and who the client is, and the sort of hierarchy of that client, if that makes any sense. Yeah, I mean, you know, when we're asking for additional design input, obviously additional fees, whatever it is, you know, you can sort of feel that resistance, and often resistance can come from sort of all manner of areas of a different business. Again, I'm trying to keep this politically anonymous, but yeah, just to wrap up really, but yeah, surprisingly lots of different angles you can receive resistance from, not just the kind of, you know, the money strings, but you know, in terms of a maintenance or a safety point of view, you know, you can receive it from all different areas. But it's a very interesting question, because what you do see, you know, if we're talking about putting trees near roads, for example, or whatever it is, you know, you would have thought perhaps, you know, safety would be one of the main sort of resistances, but you can also, as I said, maintenance can be a problem. But it's about how this decision is made, and who from the whatever company that they're representing has that kind of final say to sign it off, you know, to take that decision really. So a bit of a waffly answer, I'm afraid. Yeah,
no,
it's
very, very good answer. And I must admit, I think we've got to be ready to meet resistance with the environmental values. I mean, one of the key things I get is maintenance. People say, look, I love the idea of green infrastructure, I love the idea of a green roof, I love the idea of a living wall, but what about the ongoing maintenance? Who's going to pay for that? And I often meet that by saying, look, we pay a service charge. We used to pay for soft landscaping. That was built into service charge and management costs of the building. That needs to be, you need to budget for green infrastructure. It's just as important as budgeting for lift maintenance or fire maintenance or any other maintenance of a building. So it's good. As resistance, we must meet it with positives, I think.
Yeah, I think just add on to that, like, so what I would do is compare it to what things used to be like before Biodiversity Net Gain. So when I would be working in the design process, and I would want to get all of these like interesting features included in the design because I saw that they had benefits for biodiversity and other stuff, we were going by kind of like just written forms of policy which state that you might need to achieve biodiversity net gain, but there was no quantifiable way of doing it. So it become really sort of down to the ecologist sort of suggestions, and so you would always get pushback from that, and it would make it really hard to justify unless you had a really strong argument whether you could keep some of these habitats and features. However, now, because you're quantifying it and you're showing that you need to hit a certain target, if you're not hitting that target, you've got every justifiable reason to say, no, we need this because this is going to help us. And I'm getting a lot less pushback from different disciplines and from clients and so on, because they can see the value of it now, whereas previously they couldn't see the value. On top of that as well, I mean, we're still getting some pushback from, you know, different clients and different disciplines, And I think it is just a bedding in process. I think it's just because it's so new and they're not used to it. And I think over time, as they start to see that they do need to do it and they see the benefits of doing it, I think that resistance will drop.
That's really helpful. That's really what you're saying earlier about the analytical data. It will help overcome the resistance, won't it, Ash?
Yeah, it will. And that's the whole, I guess that's the point. I know it comes back to, I know it is kind of, you're boiling down something really complex into a single number, but at the end of the day, that's what average people understand, people that aren't ecological experts understand. And until we get greater education around ecology and throughout, and greater awareness of ecology and biodiversity across different disciplines, that's the most powerful thing at the minute, and that's where we're having the biggest impact. I'm not having any, essentially you provide the work and people don't even question it. They can kind of see the purpose of it now, which is really good.
That's brilliant. That's positive. And another interesting question coming here from Liz. Thank you, Liz. So the GI needs to be designed for long term to deliver the BNG. How do we ensure against future-proofed against climate change? And I think that's a very good question. It's something that is constantly being under review at ANS Global. Over the last 10 years, our plant palettes for certain locations has changed. It's important to realize that 10 years ago, we were having colder, longer winters. Traditionally, the last few years, we've had wetter, milder winters, and this affects how plants react and how green infrastructure reacts, full stop. We need to think of drainage, when you think of soil buildups. So it's not, with green infrastructure, to use another homely expression, it's not one broom sweeps all. It's all about understanding the location, the climate, and how the climate can change. And as it does, under maintenance, you adapt that to that climate change. Would you have anything to add on that, Bob?
No, I think you're absolutely right. Climate change is going to be one of the big challenges that we're facing alongside biodiversity decline. The two are clearly operating hand in hand. And so all we can do is make sure that we're designing to the best sort of modeling that we understand, and make sure that we've got that maintenance and management plan in place for the long term, because here we are in 2021, 30 years, 2050, the world's going to be a very different place, I think. So
exactly, and we're working towards carbon zero for 2050. So we need to make these changes now. We need to start working on it. And as we said during this call today, the importance of collaborating, sharing experiences, sharing wins, sharing, even if something hasn't worked, let's share it. Let's develop our knowledge so that we create a better future. Any more questions from the audience? Well, thank you all very much. I think that's been a very helpful. Sorry, we have gone over time. Hope you'll be all right for the rest of the day, Ash, for your schedule.
I think I'll be all right. I'll be all right.
Excellent. Well, anybody else want to say anything before we wrap up?
No, I'm really grateful for the opportunity to listen to you speak and join in here. So thanks again, Steve, and good luck with those guides.
Good. Well, thank you all very much. Thank you, Bob. Thank you, Ash and Simon, for your time today. Thank you all to the audience for joining, and please reach out to us if you have any further questions. And let's all continue on this journey to create better, greener spaces for the future that are environmentally sustainable. Thank you, and have a good rest of the day.
Thanks, guys.
Thank you, everyone.
Cheers now.
Cheers all. Cheers.
Cheers.